The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. Welcome back to Canna Chat in the Zone. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and this is a show where we talk everything Canna, from laws to effects to history of Canna, and I pride myself with getting some of the most interesting folks, and today is no exception. Carrie Tillman, how the hell are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, thanks for being on. You are, you fit right into this mode. You describe yourself as a patient advocate. Now, how does that work for you, and how do you put that to use in the Canna industry? I'll let you tell your story, if you will.
Sure. So I've been a medical marijuana patient in California for over a decade, and I moved here from the South, which is quite prohibitive on its access to cannabis and on the legalities behind it.
That's interesting. We're both from the South. I'm from the South Bronx.
Yeah, a little bit further south for me.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to see what counts. What state in the South were you from?
All right, so I'm born from South Carolina, and I lived in multiple parts of that state. I kind of loved the whole thing. And then I went to college in Atlanta. So for my, the first quarter of my life, cannabis was, very illegal. And I think that's incredibly unfortunate. I got sick when I was in Atlanta. I got a thing called shingles when I was really young, and nobody really knew what to do when it shows up in somebody that young and that severe. And I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to move to California with my husband. And that's when my life started very slowly improving, thanks to cannabis.
Oh, wow.
So what I do is I try to walk people through what it's like to need something that you're unfamiliar with, and to think about the risks of what you're putting in your body versus the rewards of what you're getting out of it.
Now, you're an educator. How do you communicate with people? By seminar, individually, through your business? How is it that you get the word out there?
I would say any way I can. I try to meet people where they're at. And on this issue, there's a whole spectrum. So sometimes it's, educating doctors, and usually the nurses don't need much education. They have a tendency to get out there and find out, things for themselves. So I look at, for instance, the Cannabis Nurses Network is doing a phenomenal job right now. But basically teaching people what the endocannabinoid system is in the first place, and how we can
for
use it to our advantage.
A lot of folks out there, you're using 10-syllable, 10 little words to folks, a lot of whom are just not stupid, but ignorant about would you explain what you just said?
Sure.
Cannabis. Okay.
Sure. So I think a great place to start is that we make chemicals that are similar to what you find in cannabis ourselves in our bodies all the time. And it's a really important part of our body's way of regulating. And so what cannabis does in some ways, for most people, not everybody, but for most people, is it is an outside source to balance what we already have inside. So everywhere in our bodies, in our brain, in our skin, in our organs, we have like puzzle pieces waiting, receptors that are waiting to fit in with these cannabinoids. And so if we don't produce enough of those endocannabinoids, the ones that our bodies make innately, then we're going to be deficient. And that's where cannabis can come in. And it's very different for each person, so it can kind of cross the spectrum, where it's not like we're saying cannabis is a cure-all for things. It's just it has a widespread number of benefits because we're literally set up to receive it on the surface of our bodies, inside our bodies by eating it, and, of course, by inhaling it. There's a reason why it's been around for 10,000 years and used and cultivated for humans and also for anything with a spine, pretty much.
Okay.
So it's not something that's covered necessarily in medical school. And if you don't learn about that as a doctor especially, why would you believe that it exists?
Right, and for the most part, doctors are pretty much influenced by the drug industry in terms of what they prescribe. As a matter of fact, that's a big part of their profit margin. So would they be willing to consider something, notwithstanding their belief system, would they be willing to, what percentage of them would be willing to consider something that would automatically eat into their income? And isn't that a big part of the problem, the drug companies and what they preach?
I think that's one huge part, for sure. I like to look at unfamiliarity. I'm eating the words, but unfamiliarity. When you're not familiar with something, you are more skeptical.
Unfamiliarity, yes.
And so,
yes, of course.
I think about it. It usually has to become personal. You have to see it yourself. You have to feel it yourself. And that's so unfortunate because that usually means that you are sick or hurting by the time you start considering something for yourself. And I think also you have to look at the opioid crisis.
As a preventative medicine, I think it works damn well. Never having had chronic pain, illness, or what have you, but having used it all my life just for the buzz initially,
sure,
not realizing the effects of it both mentally and physically, and I think it's warded off an awful lot that I could be going through in my stage of life, in my dotage, senior citizenship, if you will. I see an awful lot of folks around me who are in the system in the medical system, and I've been able to avoid that. And I have to think it's my incredible usage of weed. I have ingested an awful lot over these past 40 years, 50 years now. And I'm hoping you agree with that.
Well, let's look at that. Let's look at what cannabis is. What we know right now is that it's hundreds of parts of this plant, and only a few of them have any psychoactive properties. Only a few of them will get you high, okay? And those are an important few, and they have really important pain-relieving properties. They have important roles to play in balancing out your hormones. But there's other parts to this plant. You know, CBD is really popular right now, but it's actually an antibacterial. It's an antimicrobial. There's so many promising parts to this plant that I think it speaks to what you're talking about, where it does act preventatively. The goal of cannabis and the endocannabinoid system is to create homeostasis, and it sounds like that's what you've achieved.
Well, I hope so. Because, I just dropped it. You never know. It could happen at any moment. So how did you get started? When you first came to California, were you introduced to cannabis at that time, or were you in the black market when you lived in the South?
Oh, for sure. I was in the unregulated market in the South. So I knew about cannabis, but honestly, I come from a life where I've really just tried to put one foot in front of me to get out of what I would consider a not great situation at home. And so I was very focused on getting through school, getting my diploma, finding a place to stay for the night, just very survival oriented. So it wasn't until later on that I was able to actually take a step back and go to parties, talk to people, have a social life. And I kind of wish that I had found it earlier, because I do believe it can be profoundly helpful, especially when you're going through a stressful time in your life. But even today, I can't travel back. Yeah, even today, I can't travel home. I can't go home for the holidays. I depend on cannabis to have a highly functional life that I am incredibly grateful for. But the other half of that means that, my son doesn't get to go visit his grandparents because mommy can't take her medicine with her.
Well,
and if
there's
that
a solution
happens,
to that. I'm kind of bi-coastal. I grew up on the East Coast. Spend my life on the West Coast. Bring your family out to visit you.
Unfortunately, they're not in that situation. Again, this has to do with cannabis. My dad is going through dementia, and it breaks my heart because I know how much cannabis medicine has to offer in that situation. It can be a wonderful supplemental therapy. They've shown how it's actually removing the plaque on the brain. I mean, that's incredible. And there's almost half of our country has zero access, not only to the information, but to the medicine itself. And so it's incredibly frustrating.
And on the subject a little bit, I found out something on a Facebook posting yesterday about Alzheimer's disease and how music and lyrics and the fun people have experienced in life isn't lost on folks with Alzheimer's disease. They can remember the words. The music puts them back in their heads. It puts them back into a happy place. So if I could recommend anything besides cannabis for folks experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's disease, is introduce or reintroduce, keep introducing music to these folks. And
that's a great suggestion.
And I hope you live to remember it.
Yeah,
because
right.
As I posted on Facebook the other day on a meme, I said the real true art in life is not dying too soon or living too long. And as I look around me, that's the case. And for young people who expect it to be automatic, that you're guaranteed to be 85 or whatever, not the case. You got to live your life as if every day is important to you, no matter what age you are, because there are no guarantees.
We're all lucky to be here. We really are. I mean, I was curious about your reaction to the news from Major League Baseball this week.
As a baseball fanatic and historian and what have you, I'll first tell you what the news is. The baseball, with the capital B, the powers that be, have taken cannabis off the hard drug list of how they look at it. They're looking at it as more and more as what we say, an injury preventative, not preventative so much, treatment and what have you. And they are lessening a lot of their restrictions that I never thought I'd live to see the day. The world is conservative. The baseball is so much more conservative than you would imagine by nature, so that cannabis is likely in my lifetime, pray God, in the next 10 years, to be legalized federally, and that's nice. That does me good, because I myself have been not only a user, but like yourself, an advocate, and I've politicized it. I was originally for decriminalization, not legalization, and for all the reasons that have troubled the community with legalization, the restrictions, the taxes, all of those things that have gotten us to where we are today in California, where 80% of cannabis being supplied is still, 2 years after legalization, is supplied by the black market.
But why would that have changed? I was looking at numbers this week that show that the CDFA, they're increasing taxes for cannabis businesses next year.
Right.
And
it's
what that means...
Greed. It's
greed. If you look at it, if you pay $800, okay, for an ounce, and this is just raw price, you don't pay taxes on that $800. You pay taxes on the markup after distribution markup and retail markup. There's no way for the industry to survive. It's not sustainable. So we need to look at what California has done.
With you, with the glut on cannabis, unless you're just using that $800 as just an example, people should be paying an awful lot less than $800. And
that's just a standard price. That is just one of a column of prices that if you go right now on Facebook to the regulation group for California, they're keeping data, and the data is heartbreaking. It's absolutely soul-crushing if you believe in legalization and safe access. Everybody doesn't know a grower. Everybody doesn't know how to grow. I've grown myself. It's really hard. You have to know what you're doing. You have to pay attention, and you have to have a lot of time on your hands to be able to do it right. And so we need these dispensaries.
So many different factors involved. One would think, well, you could buy a tent, you could buy some lights, and your problems are solved. In a sense, they are, because you will never pay, after all, even factoring your time and whatever, you will never end up paying as much as you would have had you bought through the clubs. The clubs have made it prohibitive for the working people to satisfy our needs. And I'm not just talking the need to get high. I'm talking the need to be medicated both for mental good health and physical good health. It isn't debatable anymore about...
Let's call it what it is. It's privilege. Only the privileged have access. That's it. It's not right. The most medicalized products are the most expensive. They're called luxury brands.
And not just because of the pharmaceutical industry, whatever drug you choose, and I don't think marijuana or cannabis, is a drug. I think it's an herb. So and it's a weed. It's free growing, and if people would have just left it alone, and it's led to so many border problems and cartels and this stuff. All drugs should be legalized and prescribed, and that would solve an awful lot of problems in this.
And what cannabis is an exit drug. It's an exit drug. It is an amazing opportunity for people to lessen their risk, reduce their harm. It potentiates opiates. What that means is if you take one dose of an opiate and you combine it with cannabis use, you can get 4-5 times the effect. That means people can take fewer opiates and use it to withdraw safely. That's huge.
Yeah.
Right now we're in an opioid crisis.
But the
Let's
crisis
legalize
is
cannabis.
that these big drug lobbyists, just like the cigarette lobbyists that came out against pot, the alcohol lobbyists, the cotton lobbyists, because you can grow hemp without the boll weevil and all that, it just adds to those who are influencing the lawmakers, kicking
And they're
back
double
the drug
dealing. They're literally double dealing. While they're fighting it with their lobbyists, they're also investing. They're trying to get in here first. I've been watching this process here in Alameda I've been involved in it for 2 years. It's been going on for much longer, way before I got involved. And we don't have a dispensary right now. We're closer than we ever have been.
And schools are falling apart because of earthquakes. You got Lum School and another one next to it. I think it's Haight. In an earthquake situation, not Haight, it's Wood, right here in Alameda, who are closing the schools because they can't afford retrofitting, yet there are thousands of dollars being taken in taxes in Oakland, as a good example, right next door, and they can't find a way in 2 years here in Alameda to get a dispensary open, to bring in some money if for nothing else. I think it's a disgrace.
I like to err on the side of being reasonable about the process. I want to believe, and what I've seen so far, and you know that I'm an applicant with the city for a dispensary?
I do indeed. That's why you're on.
Just full disclosure there. I would like to think that what's going on here in Alameda is a process that is fully vetted and fully thought out. That is not the case in a lot of places around California right now, and in the states that are right on the cusp of legalizing. So I wouldn't say that, we can look at Oakland and say this is what we want, because they have their own issues with the cannabis process. In fact, they're being overtaxed. So we were very happy to hear this week that City Council is actually going to lower the taxes starting next year for cannabis businesses. Thank you for that.
Oh.
That's huge for Oakland.
Very nice. Would you talk to the folks that are in City Hall who are responsible for that? I'd like to give them some credit.
Sure. So that came out of the Oakland City Council, and honestly, the credit goes to the activists, plain and simple. I know Melody Montgomery has been pushing this the whole time. Amber Center has been pushing this the whole time. Rich Moskowitz, of course. So yeah, it's the activists who have been just absolutely adamant, and they're showing up. They're showing up at their own personal risk with their own issues going on in their life, and they're dedicating their time to highlight what's happening.
Who in City Hall has been help to you?
I cannot say I've been a part of it at all. I am 100% Alameda focused, so I cannot take credit for anything other than I can tell you that the mayor of Oakland was not a fan.
I'm asking, who are the politicians that help your cause, and who are the politicians who hinder your cause locally?
In Alameda?
Yeah.
Sure. So we have four pro-cannabis city council members right now, including the current mayor, and I'm really glad to say that she's pro-cannabis, because I know that wasn't always the case.
No, it
but
wasn't,
in particular,
and I'm very glad that she's evolved. I'd like to give her a lot of credit for her evolution, because very few people change in life. If you look
I think this is a universal issue that you're going to see people change on. I think that when you don't have access to facts, it's really hard to understand something that's been presented as an evil your entire life. And as science comes into this, as research opens up, it's really nice to see people who are willing to have an open mind. So I would say, of course, Trish started this. She was
Spencer,
a huge supporter,
ever had.
a huge cannabis advocate. But I would say back when Trish Spencer was mayor, We had Councilmember Vela, Councilmember Odie brought it on referral, and that was pretty much it. And now we also have John Knox White, who's been a wonderful advocate and incredibly reasonable to meet with. He's somebody who likes to, fully understand something before he comes to an opinion. And so it was really nice to see him go through that process and bring what I think is a sense of reason to this issue. So between those four, we've been able to have a lot of success. And if Tony Dasog ever wants to meet, I have a rule. I always take the meeting. So you got to meet people where they're at, and let me know where you're at, and we'll meet.
Beautiful. He would, if convinced, be a help. Let's put it that way.
And then, of course, it's city staff. They're running the RFP process. They've, done a lot of tireless work with the ordinances. We had some hiccups along the way, and it's been nice to see those worked through so this can actually proceed. And we will hear next week who the last 3 permits go to.
Well, I wish you all the best with that. I know how hard you've worked.
Thank you. And honestly, wouldn't be here without Rich Moskowitz, Sharon Golden, the entire city council. And, I have 2 awesome partners at my side, too, and that's Mark Hersman and Nick Perlis. So, I think it's just about you try to find people you can have a conversation with, and it's not about being right or wrong. It's about trying to come to a compromise.
Well, I'm happy to say that all these people you mentioned, Melody's been on my show, Trish has been on the show, Rich Moskowitz is a regular on the show. I'm proud of the people. Ryan Miller, who works tirelessly.
Oh yeah, Operation EVAC.
Right, for the veterans. He's been on a number of times, and I'm so proud to have known these people who are truly heroes. You included.
Oh, thanks. I also want to mention
helping the world.
I do want to mention though that there's a key issue that still needs to be addressed, and that's on-site consumption. We have no place for the renters on our island to medicate. We have no place for people who need a place to safely medicate without repercussions on their housing rights. Again, this is when safe access is key, because you can lose your housing if you're growing. There's so many different reasons why we need to be able to have on-site consumption. And I would like to see something more like the Lanai Club.
You could lose your house. Say that again. You could lose your house for consuming medical cannabis. Certainly, yes. Just like you can lose your job for it. Still, we need protections. And okay. In your own home, you can lose your house if you consume for
If you're a renter, if you're a renter, yeah, it's about housing rights.
You can't have your house taken away from you if you consume.
If you're renting in Alameda, it is illegal to smoke in your house, and you cannot consume. You cannot consume cannabis without that threat.
I misunderstood. I thought you said you could lose your house, which I thought you were referring to a homeowner, but you could lose your domicile if you're caught smoking, but not the ownership of your house.
Right, yeah. I'm talking about the fact that Alameda has over 50% renters. It's over half of our population, and we have nowhere that we can legally consume. Technically, it falls underneath the secondhand smoke rule and the smoking ban on the island. You cannot consume at, for instance, this is just an example, Lucky 13 on the patio. You can't do that. And so where do you go to consume safely? Where can the community get together? I mean, sessions are so important in terms of supporting one another, learning from one another, passing down these tips. that, traditionally have been completely prohibited, and now they're supposed to be legal. So let's enable that to happen. I think that the Lanai Club that Rich has proposed is brilliant. I think that we need something that isn't necessarily associated with a dispensary. I think that there should be a more universal community space that we can, get up and going. I think that we should be able to have things like wedding receptions and birthday parties that, oh my gosh, they may not have alcohol at them. They might have cannabis. That's the future.
I've got a wonderful suggestion. Whenever you want to get together in a group to smoke, why don't you invite people to go for a long walk by the beach?
That's still illegal. That's illegal.
If I walked with two or three friends and I passed the J back and forth, would that be a big crime against anybody? It's probably unenforceable. They're not going to send the police looking for walkers.
I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm saying we can do better.
Of course, but we could take, until that time comes, folks could still get together and pass a J around. They'll find a way to be creative about it.
They'll find a way, but you shouldn't have to look over your shoulder for medicating.
I know, but since the punishment, even if you were caught smoking a J on a walk, what would the punishment be?
It depends. Do you have children?
They're grown, so...
Right, but the person medicating, do they have children?
Okay, hypothetical, say they do.
These are the concerns that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that still in California, mothers are losing access to their kids for testing positive for cannabis. People are losing their jobs every day testing positive for cannabis, sometimes even when they don't even ingest THC, just because CBD comes back as a false positive. There's a lot of work to be be in order to get actual safe access and protection.
And I'm just saddened by the fact that this far down the road, people are still faced with that. In California, do they still have marijuana drug testing?
Yes. Yes. And not only do they still have it, Kaiser still requires it. So I have some of my clients, you ask what I do. I meet people one-on-one. I teach small groups. I have showed up at the Rotary Club to give presentations, Kiwanis Club to give presentations. And some of the most common questions asked are about drug testing and about access to their children. That's not acceptable. If people are making informed decisions to choose less risky ways of medicating than what is available at the cheapest dollar amount. And I'm talking right now about opioids. I'm talking about gabapentin. I'm talking about, antidepressants that are covered in full if you were lucky enough to have insurance. Cannabis is none of those things. It's expensive and you're taking a risk. And I think not enough people are necessarily feeling the desperate pull that so many of us still have if we have young kids and we have jobs that test.
Okay. Can I inject a little positiveness into this?
Oh, I'd love that.
Could you give, or we could give the folks an idea that they are, because of the legalization, Prop 64, you're legally allowed to grow up to 6 plants legally in your home. You could buy a tent and a light and grow up to 6 plants and supply yourself.
You could.
I would suggest, if people want to look into that, that could solve an awful lot of problems. And what do you say to that?
I think anybody who wants to grow should be able to. I love it when dispensaries like Magnolia Wellness teach their clientele how to grow for themselves. But not everyone has access to that or the time or the interest or the ability. And so it's frustrating to know that, I think about my chronic pain support groups that I help moderate. I have people who are losing access to their pain medication because they're testing positive for cannabis. That's not right. So when you look at the Major League Baseball decision, one thing I'd like to highlight about that, they didn't just reverse course on marijuana. What they did was they inserted required testing for opioids. And that is huge. That's going to save lives. You want to talk about positivity? That's it. What we need is more examples like Major League Baseball this week. We need people to rethink opioids, rethink cannabis, and see how there is a path out of this.
And I would also suggest to folks that they cultivate a relationship with a black market grower. There are many of them.
Well, let's talk about your program. Right?
Which program is that? This
you
program?
have a bartering program, right?
Oh, well, I'm writing a book, as a matter of fact, and thank you for mentioning that. I'm in the early stages. I've combined forces with an old camp friend who is an editor, and the book is called Ziggy's List. And Ziggy's List is a list of folks in California who are apt, if given the opportunity, to provide their goods and services and barter them for full or partial payments, whatever they are, with cannabis, for
Brilliant.
cannabis products and what have you, so that people can work together in the old-fashioned way of you do for me, I do for you.
Right.
And I think
the original commerce?
The original commerce, actually the original commerce. We know what that was, and that still works great if you could find somebody to go Dutch with you.
Touché.
Okay, but the second original commerce is simply trade, and barter, for some reason, is illegal in California, but this suggests this will be a book of folks who will contribute their story of cannabis. They're not just going to get to put your name on a list and people can deal with you. Going to give them a reason to deal with you. I'm looking for folks who have been in the cannabis community and appreciate the idea of sharing. And that's what it was based on. All this commercial stuff, get it legal, taxes and that doesn't, it's, a lot of people still feel resentment to paying taxes to the government, which still puts people in jail for the same thing, if you know, and still has people in jail. So this will give people an opportunity to deal with the community and in a way that's unique. And it's called Ziggy's List. In about a year, you can look for it on the bookshelves, on Amazon, and I'm really excited about it. So,
and I hope that we can have a community space where we can talk about your book and we can meet each other, because that's what it's about. It's about the cannabis community. And the community is growing. It's growing every day. And that's what excites me.
We may not be able to do it in person, but we do have the blessing of the Internet, which is something that is relatively new in society. People haven't been able to communicate. I've never met you in person, yet our paths cross, because of the internet. So I think if we continue to come together on these cannabis spaces like East Bay Canna, Alameda has a site, Alameda has the Lanai Club, they have the ACT. If you just go to Facebook and plug these in, we could use more folks in these groups to contribute as well. But I know what you mean. I'm not, at this point in my life, I'm not subject to being thrown out of a place for smoking, but I can really identify with those who are. And I just wish us all good luck in finding a community center. How about you rent out a gym?
Right. Or I think the Mastic Senior Center is a natural place to start.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. It's right off every bus. You can get to it literally at bus stops. The 51 and the O stop right in front of it. It's no pun intended. It's located, I was going to say it's on Central. It's centrally located. It's not that centrally located to Central. It's a few blocks over. It's on...
Only one. It's my next-door neighbor.
Santa Clara. Whoa. I'm right down the street on Lincoln.
We're neighbors.
So we are indeed neighbors. And perhaps...
When I think about the senior center, you know what I think about? I think about the population that is consuming the biggest amount of prescription drugs is right now the fastest growing segment of Canna curious people because they've had enough. They're ready to look for other alternatives. They want to feel better. And I think that we could learn a lot from them.
Yeah. And before we close, let's not pay homage to just Smoke and Jay for a good old-fashioned hit, a good old-fashioned buzz.
You know, you say that, and it makes me want to ask you. Have you ever vaporized?
You know, right in the middle of our conversation when we were talking about ways of consuming, I was going to ask you about, I did vape for, I went on, speaking on going back east, I don't fly, and I took the train. And the train is on federal property, so I took a vape as not to get busted, if you will. And I was 10-day trip, 14 days in New York and going back and forth. I was at the mercy of having a vape instead of the old-fashioned way of putting it in your one-hitter or rolling a joint. It is not as... I didn't enjoy the experience. All the stuff that's coming out about vapes scares me. And
it should.
It should, and it's the way I looked at it when I started seeing these things in the paper. I realized I was getting some of those symptoms that they were talking about. It is not a good way of doing it. I will, and I was one of those who would supply, because I'm like a 2-bit pot dealer myself, from the old days. No pretenses there. I'd recommend to folks that they vape up to fool the wife, in quotes. There are a lot of people whose spouses simply haven't accepted the fact that getting high is, if I get high, shouldn't really concern you if my head changes, spouse. But that's another story. So I turned a lot of people on to vaping because of that, and now it turns out that that is a serious problem. what were you going to say about
let's talk about that problem, because first of all, let's say what those symptoms that you talked about were, so other people know what to look out for. So
Okay.
if when you are hitting a vaporizer, your throat is hurting and it feels like metal almost, if you can taste that, that's a bad sign. If you have a lingering cough, if you have a lingering headache with no fever, these are the symptoms that we're talking about. Just this week, Colorado Green Labs did a live Reddit, which is still available right now, that has all kinds of information about what's happening in the vaporizing crisis. What we're finding is that it doesn't exist in Europe. It's a U.S. problem. We're special like that. And the reason why we're special like that is because...
Are you including dabs, what they call dabs?
No, this is just what's called EVALI, which is a vaporized-associated pulmonary illness, a respiratory illness. And so what they're finding is things like cobalt long are back, which is honestly not something that you should have unless you're mining cobalt. And the reason why these conditions are happening is because we do not regulate the devices themselves. The vaporization devices themselves go through absolutely no required testing when they are most likely imported from other countries, and the raw materials made to make them are, we're talking about chromium. We're talking about tin. We're talking about... No, they are not. And that is part of the problem. If you outlaw access to something that isn't regulated, what are you doing? You're increasing the unregulated market. This is cheap materials used to improperly make devices. And when you take these devices apart, which is what Colorado Green Labs did live on Facebook and Reddit this week, and you can still go and see the pictures of these devices as they're dissected. It's really kind of fascinating. What they're saying is that you need to make sure that if you're choosing to vaporize, you need to look at your device. When you pull in, if it is inhale activated, if you are not pushing any buttons to turn on that power, you need to make sure that the battery component doesn't have any holes in it. If that battery component is not completely insulated, when it heats up, they're actually finding exposed solderings that are getting heat up, and then you're breathing in those metal fumes. Okay, so that's the device itself, and that's a complete lack of regulation. And the way that you fix that is you just regulate it like Europe does. They do not have this problem there. So that's fixable. The other part that you're seeing, and this is largely on the unregulated market, is the actual liquid inside the vaporizer cartridges. And what that should be is just cannabis. That's the only thing that should be in there. You should not have synthetic terpenes. You shouldn't have anything made in a lab. It should literally just be cannabis oil. And if there are thickeners in there, like vitamin E acetate, you are breathing in a substance that, yes, it might be legal and rated safe to put on your skin, but that is not the same thing as inhaling these incredibly fine particles that are then sticking to the bronchioles and suffocating people from the inside out. So it's a bunch of different problems, and we've got to look at each angle and figure out how to fix it. Banning it is not an answer. It's just not. So I think about my friend in Florida who died from this. That was preventable.
Wow.
I think about my friend in Atlanta who I just kept calling and saying, I don't like how you're sounding. Are you using unregulated vapes? She's in Georgia. So, they don't have access to anything legal. And sometimes now what you're finding is it's easier to get a hold of a vaporizer than it is to actually get a hold of bud. And if that's the only option, what do people take?
Well,
so what are we talking about? Federalization? Regulation of devices? I mean, at least just regulate them like you do the plumbing parts in our water system that all have to be tested for lead, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So these problems are fixable.
Again, you're going to talk about the regulation is going to lead to a price increase that may become prohibitive.
Right. So you're looking at a situation where 20 of our states have no regulation, and very little tested access. And yet you want to be able to regulate without over-regulating like California has done to the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's about everything else in life, including your endocannabinoid system. It's about finding that balance. And the only way we can do that is if we approach this with reasoning and logic and science. It's possible.
That's a good combination. That's a good three. Bringing science into it. At least you didn't say we can pray over it.
Well, there are several.
That was after making such good sense, the whole conversation. Could you imagine if you ended? Well, let's just take a moment. Ralph,
I'm not going to put it off the table because there are some actual cannabis references in the Bible. So, like I said, meet people where they're at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're not going to take it off the table, but you didn't put it on the table.
That's accurate.
And you wouldn't have brought it up if I didn't mention it. Hey, listen, I was trying to be funny. Anybody finds their spirituality in any which way they want to find it is cool with me. God bless you. Just don't expect me to pay for it. So maybe someday after this entire marijuana or cannabis thing is settled, and it may take 5 years, maybe then we can get around to taxing religion.
Well, now we're talking about a radical concept. I mean, we could start by, just get rid of the tax breaks.
Well, they're doing
it
in Montreal, so it isn't all that radical. And they've done it in other cities. It may be radical on the federal level, but let's just assume we're talking about Alameda, California.
Imagine what the roads would look like.
If they taxed St. Joe's and that whole church and how much they own, the property they own in Alameda that goes untaxed. And can I tell you a cute little story?
Sure.
This is 2 or 3 years ago. They put out, the city government put out it's almost like they give free money to people, to businesses that want to refurbish their front of their business. They did it on Park Street. They did it on Webster Street, right?
Sure.
The Catholic Church applies for refurb. Not only don't they pay taxes, but they apply for a grant so that they can have the city pay to refurbish the storefront of the businesses that they own.
That's incredible.
That's incredible. It made me laugh that it made me laugh because people put money in the collection box for no other reason. And if they just taxed religion, the hungry could be fed, the curious could be educated, and life would be much better. There'd be enough money.
Every time I look at a speed bump now, I'm going to think, he was right. Imagine what the roads would look like.
The speed bump, by the way, the speed bumps that they put in right by the church down there, it was done so that the parents of these kids wouldn't be in a race. You leave off your kid, you're speeding through the area. Isn't that
I used to live in that part of town. Yeah, I used to live in that part of town, and it gets so tight in those side roads.
Put speed bumps in, but the church, instead of putting the speed bumps in the property that they own that they don't pay taxes on, they build the city, put the speed bumps in. And there's no other school that you leave your kid off the speed bumps.
Yeah.
You go to hate school, you drive by on Lincoln, you go to Wood, there's no speed bumps, any of these schools, except the Catholic Church. And that turned my stomach. When that
So
happened.
we need more speed bumps in schools and fewer speed bumps in cannabis regulation.
I don't want to say what we need more of, but we need to tax the church. My brain doesn't work that fast that I could do the math on where to take the money from, but it would all be solved if churches were taxed. And it's not just.
I'm pretty sure John Oliver has several episodes doing the math on this.
Okay.
So I think he's done some of the work for you. He formed a church just to prove all these.
Ralph Tycho. Having people do the work for me isn't something that's new. Anybody listening that knows me.
Oh, we need to meet in person.
Well, will you be doing the work?
I do like to roll. It's true. I used it as physical therapy for my left hand for a long time.
Well, you do the rolling. We'll walk around and smoke a J, and we'll risk the wrath of the law and see if we can do that.
We'll pick out the strain using our nose, which is a great thing to stick in there because it's really important for people to know. The nose knows. If a strain's going to work for you, smell it.
Durante, you're not old enough to know who Jimmy Durante was, but Jimmy Durante would say, the nose knows.
It just does.
It does. Hey, you're a pleasure to talk to. I hope you'll come back.
Oh, it's great talking to you.
And we'll do it again, and between now and the next time, we will walk around and risk the wrath of the law. Because if these policemen are driving around, two in a big old car, chasing speeders that go 27 instead of 25, they're not going to be looking for us. That's my point.
What I would say is that I sat down with two lovely members of the Alameda Police Department just last month, and I asked them their opinions on cannabis legalization, on the dispensaries coming to town, and they were incredibly supportive. They said they do not enjoy having to write tickets to anyone for consuming, a medicine. But more than that, they were really glad to have the responsibility lifted from them on judging what's medication and what's not. So recreational came in, and it made their job easier. I was very happy to hear their responses.
I'm sure if we walked down the street, we'd be discreet enough. We wouldn't just be puffing away in their face. You just walk down the street, and you light up when you need it, and this, that, and the other thing. I don't think they care. As a law enforcement agency, the Alameda Police Department really
No,
is
it tends to be each other. We tend to rat on each other. That's usually what happens. Is people call in. And that's the part about the community with cannabis that we really have to keep going back to. Just focus on the community, learn from each other, support each other. And I think that we're doing that here in Alameda, and it's just going to get better.
Beautiful. And I'm hoping that Alameda could be a prototype for the rest of the state and the country.
I agree.
Beautiful. Nice meeting you on the phone, young lady.
So nice. I can't wait to see you.
All right, Carrie. Be well. Carrie Tillman, I must ask you, because I am such a sports nut, the name Tillman, the great war
I know.
hero.
No relation. No relation.
No relation. Bet people ask all the time.
They do.
That's a question. That story, it's fresh in my mind because I am such a sports nut. Poor guy was killed by friendly fire.
I know.
Awful. They go back and try to change the story and how he was killed.
And also no relation to Tillman Park, although I think we are required to do our family photos there from now on.
Oh, okay. Right in front of that sign. That's a nice park, by the way.
It is.
Alameda, anybody out there want to move to Alameda, see the Chamber of Commerce? This is a great community. It's right
It's our
off,
home, and we're lucky to be here.
we're right across the bay from San Francisco, right across the moat from Oakland. So it makes it much nicer. Let's get that dispensary in so folks don't have to go to Oakland to consume, and that would be nice.
Well, this time next week we'll have our answer.
You'll come back on the show and celebrate.
That sounds good to me.
All right, Carrie. Nice meeting you. Thank you
You
for listening,
too.
everybody. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The show is Canna Chat in the Zone. I'm Ralph Tycho, and stay scofflaw if you can. Adios, everybody. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.